Professor Jeremi Suri, what is nation building?
Nation building is the effort to actually get involved in another society and help that society improve itself as you improve yourself as well.
Who does the nation building?
Well, a variety of actors, but one of the points I make in my book is that part of nation building is actually being part of a process that involves bringing Americans to another society, not dictating to another society, but working with people in another society. So it's Americans and citizens of another society working together.
Liberty's Surest Guardian is your most recent book, and I want to read just a portion here and get you to expand on this. Nothing could be more American than to pursue global peace through the spread of American-style institutions. Nothing could be more American than to expect ready support for this process from a mix of local populations, international allies, and of course, the United States government.
Yes. One of the things that is so quintessentially American is to believe that people can come together to make the world a better place and that it can be done in a representative, empowering way. Americans believe this instinctively, even if it doesn't always happen. And I argue in the book it's something that comes from our own experience at home. Our society has and still is a nation-building project, and we believe that it's possible to do that elsewhere. And I embrace that idealism myself, I must say.
Dr. Suri, how have you organized this book?
I've organized the book around a number of case studies. The first chapter lays out the general argument, but the general argument also comes from our own experience during the Revolution. So I begin with Madison and Washington, and the phrase Liberty's Surest Guardian is actually from George Washington. And then I go through a series of cases, Reconstruction after the Civil War, Philippines, Germany, Vietnam, and Afghanistan.
And you use the word Reconstruction throughout. Reconstruction after fascism, Reconstruction after World War II. Why that word?
Well, because I believe part of the American project of nation building is to reconstruct other societies. Empires believe that societies can't change, that they have to be dominated and controlled from the outside. Americans believe that societies can be rebuilt to be better for themselves and better for us. This is self-interest as well as altruistic activity.
So, on a personal level, do you support the concept of nation building?
I do. I don't see how we can escape it. In fact, I argue in the book that I cannot predict, no one can predict the next foreign policy crisis, but I can safely predict that the next president will be involved in nation building again. It's in our DNA as Americans. It's what defines us as Americans.
Has there been a president who hasn't been involved in nation building?
Not a president who actually oversaw a period of any major American expansion. There have been presidents who have served in short periods when the United States was contracting, and that's okay. There are moments we might be in one of those moments right now. But any expansive period when Americans have gone out in the world and sought to expand their interest has always involved nation building.
When has it been successful?
It's been most successful under two conditions. One, when Americans are really committed to the cases they're involved in, and two, when we have good overseas partners. And one of the questions we need to ask ourselves, are we going into a place in the world that we believe in and where people there are willing to work with us? If we answer no to either of those questions, I argue in the book, then we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't do nation building everywhere and at all times.
Where have we done it successfully?
Well, Germany is the example most people bring out after World War II. Japan would be another one. I argue in the book those are extreme cases. Most will not be that successful, and we shouldn't hold that up as a standard. I think the best we can hope for is pretty much what we had in Reconstruction after the Civil War and in the Philippines in the early 20th century, where we go into a part of our own country or to another society that's undergone major transformation, and we contribute to making the place a little bit better. But it's always a muddy process. It's never short, and it always involves setbacks as well as forward movements.
Dr. Suri, what about a case such as Iraq, where perhaps the U.S. spurred the change in society and now has gone into the reconstruction phase?
Well, this happened very quickly in Iraq, in part because the traditional military part of the operation ended very quickly. And quite frankly, and I'm certainly not the first to say this, Americans were unprepared for what came next. I think there was a case to be made that we could have done a good job in Iraq, and maybe we started to do a good job by 2007, 2008. But we went in without proper planning, and we went in unprepared for what we were doing. Most of all, I argue in the book, we went in before we had finished the job in Afghanistan. And what strikes me about Iraq is that this is the only case I've seen where the United States chooses to do two major nation-building operations at the same time. Generally, we try to do one first if we're going to do one, finish it, and then move on to another.
What about Afghanistan?
I think we had a real opportunity in Afghanistan. I argue in the book, and I believe this firmly, that in late 2001, 2002, the people of Afghanistan from various tribal groups wanted something different. And they had a history of a functioning nation from the late 60s and early 70s. I go through that in the book. Not a nation that any of us would want to live in per se, but a functioning nation state. They wanted to go back to that. The bond negotiation process showed that. And we took our eyes off the ball. We promised nation building, but then we diverted all of our resources to Iraq. And I think we will long rue that decision.
Jeremi Suri, is there any place else in the world right now that the U.S. is nation building?
Well, to some extent, we are in Libya, and we should acknowledge that. We were part of a multinational operation that unseated a long-serving dictator. Muammar Gaddafi had been in power for more than 4 decades. And we've been working very closely, along with our allies, with the Transitional Council, which is basically made up of various rebel forces. So we are part of this process. To say that we're involved in nation building doesn't mean we have to do it through military occupation or that we have to do it just ourselves. But we are part of this process. And if nation building fails in Libya, our military operation will have been a failure as well. Because if a new Gaddafi arises, then we've wasted our time and wasted our assets. If we can contribute to a more participatory and peaceful society there, that will be to our benefit as well as the benefit of the people in the region. How can we not do nation building there?
Besides our own willingness to nation build, two of the other aspects that you say are needed are a willing population and international allies.
Yes.
When have the three of those, besides Germany and Japan, when have the three of those things coalesced well?
Well, they've coalesced in a number of the cases that I point out. So, for instance, I think after the Civil War, most of our allies actually wanted us to succeed. They wanted stability in this part of the world, even those who might have wanted more interests in North America. In the case of the Philippines, we benefited also from a lot of other interests that saw us as a better alternative in the Philippines to the Germans or to the British or others. So we benefited from being the new kids on the block, in a sense. And I believe in Afghanistan that in late 2001, 2002, we had a lot of those advantages as well. Let's separate Afghanistan from Iraq. Our allies supported what we did in Afghanistan. Our allies, including the Russians, wanted stability in Afghanistan, and we squandered that opportunity. So my point is, let's be attentive to when our allies will support us, and let's take advantage of those opportunities.
Jeremi Suri was a former professor of history at the University of Wisconsin, and he's just recently moved down here to the University of Texas. What are you teaching down here?
I'm teaching a course on the international history of the last century. What have we learned from the wars and reconstruction and nation-building activities? And I'm also teaching a course on strategy and global policy. How do you strategize to run an organization or make policy in a global world today? Next year, I'll be teaching the American History Survey, which I love. I love having freshmen, and I love being able to expose them to this material. It's so much fun.
On an American History Survey course, where do you start?
Well, I started in 1865. We tend to break the course around the time of the Civil War. But I would love to do a year-long course covering both halves of American history. I think there's so many issues there, and all the issues that are old are new again. We're dealing with the debt crisis. We're dealing with questions of American foreign activity. They're there in the 18th century, and they're there today.
He's also the author of Henry Kissinger and the American Century and American Foreign Relations since 1898. Why in that book did you start with 1898?
Well, because 1898 marks a moment when the United States really announces itself on the world stage and is recognized by other powers as at least being a major entity, a major actor internationally. So that's a kind of breaking point, but as I argue in my new book, the Civil War is perhaps really the breaking point.
Did Henry Kissinger participate in your book, your '07 book about him?
He did. I spent a lot of time actually interviewing him and talking with him and getting to know him reasonably well. And he's an amazing figure. I have mixed feelings about him, as most people do, but I don't think anyone who spent time with him can help but respect his intellect and his seriousness, and I share that respect.
Jeremi Suri, professor at UT. His most recent book, Liberty's Surest Guardian, American Nation Building, from the Founders to Obama.